Do you want to know more about how you can eat for better health and longevity, and how your diet and lifestyle can play a part in chronic disease? Then you're in the right place. I'm Claire Day.
And I'm Daisy Lund, and we are both plant-based doctors with a passion for improving nutritional education. In this podcast, we will bring you all the latest medical evidence on how a plant-based diet can improve your health whilst being kinder to the planet and fairer to the animals that we share it with.
Twice a month, we bring you interviews from experts in the field with a focus on an important topic related to plant-based health, all while sharing recipes and food ideas.
So, welcome to, in a nutshell, the Plant-Based Health Professionals podcast.
Okay, so I'm super excited to introduce Dr. Alan Desmond. He's a consultant gastroenterologist with a special interest in the role of diet in the prevention and treatment of digestive disease. He is the author of The Plant-Based Diet Revolution. He posts a wealth of knowledge on Instagram and has around 135,000 followers. But since he is also an ambassador for PBHP UK, we are very pleased he is joining us for this episode. So Alan, welcome to In a Nutshell.
Hey Claire, thanks for having me on. Thanks for taking time to talk about gut health, such an important issue. And first of all, before we go on, congratulations on the podcast. It's doing great. I've really been enjoying it, and it's a real honour to be on it as a guest.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for taking the time. Shall we go to the first question then, which is basically, we know that medicine is an environment that has not traditionally taught us that diet beyond the basics, so we shouldn't have too much sugar, saturated fat, can influence our health. So tell us what it was that convinced you of the benefits of going plant-based.
Well, very early on in my career, Claire, when I decided that I wanted to do gastroenterology as a specialty, so when I was a senior house officer and a registrar working in gastroenterology, I realized very, very quickly that every single patient, almost to a fault, almost every single patient with a GI disorder, whether that's gallstones, duodenal ulcer, diverticular disease, colon polyps, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, or any of the GI problems that fill up our GP waiting rooms and gastroenterology clinics and endoscopy suites, that whenever you spoke to a patient and you explained the diagnosis, the medications, the prognosis, the need for scans, the need for surgery, the need for drugs, almost every single patient turns to you and asks, well, what should I eat? Or what about food? Or is there any food I should eat or any food I should avoid? Because luckily for gastroenterologists, our patients make that connection very quickly. Because they've got GI issues or tummy problems, they make a line very, very directly between food and improving their GI problem. And that's when a patient asks you that question, it's an incredible opportunity to help to improve the prognosis. Because not only is the patient asking you, what can I eat to feel better today? They're really asking, what can I eat or avoid in order to improve my prognosis? So I spend less time in hospital. So I need fewer immune suppressant drugs. So I'm less likely to grow another colonic polyp. So I'm less likely to have a recurrence of the colon cancer that I've just been treated for. And even as a young doctor, I really wanted to give my patients evidence-based answers to those questions. So very early on, as an SHO, even in 2006, 2007, very early in my career, I guess as a registrar by 2006, 2007, actually, even at that point, I was reading the medical journals, the same journals and textbooks that you read as a trainee specialist or someone who's aspiring to be a gastroenterologist. And of course, I would read all the papers about the latest endoscopic techniques and latest surgery and all the incredible new drugs and the biologic drugs that were being developed for inflammatory bowel disease and all those really exciting developments that make gastroenterology such an exciting specialty to work in. But I would also look at the papers about diet and lifestyle. And when it comes to food, when you look at all the studies on all of these digestive health conditions, when it comes to prevention, when it comes to improving prognosis and safeguarding our digestive health for the future, you see two very strong themes emerging in the literature. Number one, avoid junk food, eat whole food, eat unprocessed food, eat food that is not ultra-processed junk food, the kind of stuff that makes up 60% of calories consumed in the UK right now. It's aimed for food that you have bought at the supermarket or the farmer's market or wherever that looks pretty close to its original form, and then you take it home and you cook it and eat it. Whole food. And the second message that you see very clearly is get as much of your food as possible from plant-based sources: fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, etc., because this combination of whole foods, predominantly or exclusively plant-based, ticks all the right boxes for excellent gut health, excellent bowel health, regular bowel movements, a healthier gut microbiome, and significant reductions in numerous diseases that absolutely fill our hospitals and units. And I guess then, as a consultant gastroenterologist in 2012, and a few years after that, once I became involved with plant-based health professionals, my confidence in speaking to my patients about this, and because the amount of education that I've given myself, very gladly led me to the point where I was seeing some really remarkable turnarounds in digestive health in my patients, whether they had, minor problems like constipation or more serious problems like inflammatory bowel disease. Some really, really dramatic transformations that I just had never seen using the prescription pad alone. And for anyone who's listening to this and thinking, well, does switching from a standard British diet, so a standard British diet, to a healthy whole food plant-based diet make a significant difference? It makes a huge difference. And the statistics, just in terms of prevention, for example, shows that people who eat a healthy plant-based diet compared to people who eat a standard British diet are 80%, may have an up to 80% reduction in developing GI cancers, about a 50% reduction in risk of developing Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, substantially reduced risk of being admitted to hospital for any reason. As part of a healthy diet and lifestyle, up to a 90% reduced risk of developing myocardial infarction, 60% reduced risk of type 2 diabetes, dramatically reduced risk of hypercholesterolemia, high blood pressure. So it makes a difference. It very much makes a difference. And when you start to implement this in your clinical practice, and you start to educate, motivate, and support your patients to make this change, you suddenly find out how medicine really works. And you find out, just like Hippocrates taught, that food is medicine, and it makes a huge difference. And that's why I'm proud to be an ambassador for plant-based health professionals, and that we're on this incredible mission to educate our fellow health professionals, members of the public, policy members, etc., on how much food matters and how much we can do to improve our health, the health of our families, the health of our patients.
Thank you. That was an absolutely brilliant overview. I'm going to just put a bit of a challenge in there and say that, you are 100% plant-based. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. So in 2016, having looked at all the evidence, and you know what it's like. Once you know, you know. Once you hear all of those statistics and you realize that, for example, people who don't eat meat and eat a plant-based diet are up to 80% less likely to develop GI cancers. And when in your day-to-day work, you meet people all the time with GI cancers, and you function and work very much at the sharp end of healthcare. It becomes very logical to you that, look, rather than moderating, I don't want to go for moderately good results here. I want to. I'm going to go cold tofu. I'm going to go the whole way here. And it's wonderful. Dr. Kim Williams says, the cardiologist, the former president of the American Heart Association, so previously the most senior cardiologist in the United States, as he previously said, I don't mind dying, I just don't want it to be my fault. So,
Yeah.
I don't mind getting diverticular disease, and, low risk is not no risk, but I definitely don't want to contribute towards my own risk. It kind of comes back to that basic tenet of practicing medicine, doesn't it? Primum non nocere. So do no harm.
Yeah.
I apply that to myself as well, Claire.
I was listening to something the other day where there was an expert saying, well, you can get almost all the benefits from going 70 to 80% plant-based. What would you say to that?
You can get almost all the benefits, but when all the benefits are up for grabs, why not aim for that? I think there's a temptation within medicine to want to get people to aim for moderately good. Okay, so for example, in the UK, all the time we talk about getting your 5 a day. So we want people to get their 5 fruits and vegetables per day. But of course, the evidence tells us that 5 a day should be regarded as the absolute minimum level of consumption. So because so many people in the UK, perhaps 90%, aren't even getting to that level, that's the public health message. But research tells us time and time again that if we give people a target when it comes to food, they seldom meet it. So by telling people to eat 5 portions of fruit per day, we're going to be lucky if people get 2 or 3 portions per day. So I think we need to stop soft peddling the evidence on this, because we know that the benefits of servings of fruits and vegetables don't stop at 5, they don't stop at 10, they don't stop at 12, they probably don't stop at 15. So I think we need to be very clear when we're talking about this publicly, is we need to tell people the truth. So diets without meat deliver an 80% reduction in risk of GI cancers. So some say, well, what if I want to eat some meat? They're like, okay, that's fine, but you're not going to get all of the benefits. What if I want to have bacon once a week? Okay, that's fine, but just remember that no matter how seldom you consume bacon, so let's say you have a bacon butty once a month, just remember that beans are still going to be a healthier choice on that given day. So that's the evidence, and I think we need to be very, very clear on that. But of course, that doesn't mean that we live in some crazy fantasy land where we expect that everybody is going to have the educational resources, the family support, the ability to shop for themselves, the know-how to implement this effectively, because it's going to be a real struggle for people. So we need to be very clear on the evidence, but then we need to educate, motivate, and support our patients in order to stay on track. I was listening to an interview with the wonderful US researcher from Stanford, Christopher Gardner, just yesterday, and he was talking about a landmark study that he did a number of years ago, the Diet Fits study, where they compared the efficacy of the Ornish diet versus the Zone diet versus the Atkins diet. Okay, so they put people on each of these diets for a year. Their primary outcome was weight loss, and basically what they found after a year was that everybody lost weight. There wasn't any major difference between them. So you go, that doesn't quite make sense. So why is that? Why is that everybody we gave these radically different approaches? Because what they did was they got the books for each of those diets. Then they had a dietitian read the book to the patient or the study participant, and that was the end of the intervention. They said, now go off and do that. And what the evidence showed them is that people didn't do it. They just weren't motivated, they weren't educated, and they weren't supported. So if you want to get these so by the end of that study, Claire, the reason that there was no difference between the results is because genuinely, at the end of the study, after 12 months, nobody was doing Atkins, nobody was doing Zone, and nobody was doing the Ornish diet. They'd all just made various tweaks to their baseline diet, so everyone was kind of doing the same thing. So we need to deliver ongoing support. And look, at the moment in the UK, when it comes to the consumption of animal products in particular, so, rather than just, it's very important that we focus on including fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, etc. That's super important. But it's also important that we speak very honestly about reductions in animal product consumption as part of that. It's a whole food, plant-based diet. So plant-based is really important. So the evidence on human health tells us that the safe level of consumption for bacon, sausages, and processed meat is zero. These are group 1 carcinogens, which are responsible for 640,000 deaths globally every single year. And they're on no healthy eating guide. If you look at the Canadian Healthy Eating Plate, the Eat Lancet report, Healthy Eating Guidelines, bacon does not feature, sausages do not feature. The safe level of consumption of bacon is zero. The UK level of consumption is 25 grams per day per adult. When it comes to red meat, so our beef and lamb and all the rest of it, and pork, the safe level of consumption is probably zero, but because it's difficult to demonstrate harm at low levels of consumption, we say, okay, you can probably have between 7 and 14 grams per day, which would be one relatively small serving per week or every 2 weeks, right? But like I said earlier, on that given day, having beans is still healthier than having beef. So safe level of consumption, about 14 grams per day. Current UK level of consumption, 75 grams per day. 75 grams per day, so 5 to 10 times the upper limit of safety. When it comes to poultry, so chicken predominantly, but other forms of poultry as well, we know that the safe level of consumption, so that we don't increase our risk of heart disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, but also increase our risk of hospitalization with duodenal ulcer, duodenitis, gastritis, and gallbladder disease, the safest level of consumption is probably about 30 grams per day, maybe 60 grams per day. But again, on that day when you decide to have that poultry, beans and tofu and plant-based sources of protein and sources of iron are still going to be a healthier choice on that given day. But if we say the safe level of consumption, the maximum is about 30 to 60 grams per day, the UK level of consumption right now is 230 grams per person per day. So that's about 7 times, maybe 3 to 7 times, or 4 to 7 times the upper limit of safety. So in the UK right now, people are consuming about 85 kilograms of meat per person per year. We are consuming way more than the safe level of consumption. And it's arguable that the safest level of consumption is close to zero, particularly for red meat and almost definitely for processed meat. So when it comes to meat consumption, the UK and high-income countries in general are flying way too close to the sun. Way too close to the sun. So the way we speak to the public and the way we speak to our colleagues and the way we speak to our patients about this needs to be understanding and kind and supportive. But it's also got to be very, very clear. We've got to be very, very clear that the consumption needs to come way down. It's not about moderating. It's about really flipping this thing on its head.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned not just about how we speak to patients, but also how we speak to colleagues. And I've heard you say that there are 2 types of gastroenterologists, plant-based and those that haven't read the evidence. So can you say more about how that's going in your field?
Well, of course, I'm borrowing that phrase from the great Dr. Kim Williams, who said there are 2 kinds of cardiologists, the vegans or those who haven't read the data. I think he said that back in about 2016. And of course, he was right. And within about 3 years, the American Heart Association had revised its dietary guidelines for the prevention of heart disease, indicating that a varied vegetarian diet would be the preferable diet. So a whole food or vegetarian, kind of Mediterranean style vegetable-based diet being the best. And as you know, the American Heart Association's presidential advisory that was issued, I think, last year, is quite clear that vegan and vegetarian diets meet all the requirements of the 10 different dietary changes that are recommended for substantially reducing one's risk of heart disease. So that's Kim Williams' phrase, which I repurposed. And when I first met Kim, actually, at a plant-based health professionals event in London a few years ago, I told him that. I said, there's 2 kinds of gastroenterologists as well, Kim. So how's it going? I think it's going well, actually. And I'll tell you a story that really shows you how this is entering the mainstream. So every year, Claire, I go to the British Society of Gastroenterology meeting. So this is the annual conference for British gastroenterologists. It also attracts international attendees. It's a very big conference at the XL in London. It's wonderful. So literally, it's a great place to be if you're a gut health nerd, because you are surrounded by thousands of other gut health nerds from around the country and elsewhere, and you get to go deep on gut health, which is fantastic. So in the past number of years, not only are we seeing more and more talks and more speakers talking about the benefits of plant-based eating, but this year at the conference a few months ago, every day at the conference catering, there were 3 meal options. So as you know, at these big conferences, there's big catering companies involved because there's a lot of people to feed, and there's a big buffet lunch every day and a buffet breakfast every day. On each day of I think it's a 5-day conference, there was 3 options, and 2 of the 3 options were completely plant-based. And not only were they completely plant-based, they were healthy plant-based. They were whole food plant-based options. So historically, at a conference like that, I would have to bring my own food, or I'd have to nip out somewhere to get something to eat, or I'd have to go and annoy the catering staff to get something healthy to eat. But this year, I didn't have any problem because there was healthy plant-based options available for all of the delegates each day. And on one day of the conference, there was no meat and dairy on the menu whatsoever. It was a completely whole food plant-based conference. So I think that's a really interesting indicator of where the medical fraternity and the gastroenterology fraternity and sorority are moving on food. And I had the opportunity during that conference to pose a question during one of the main plenary sessions. We'd had a very interesting talk on cancer epidemiology. We'd had a very interesting talk on reducing the climate impact of our medical practices. And both speakers had highlighted particularly the negative impacts of red and processed meat in terms of cancer risk, health, and environmental impact. So I was able to pose a question to the president of the society and to all the attendees at this plenary session, probably about 1,500 gastroenterologists. Isn't it time that we get these red and processed meats in particular off of our GI units across the UK? Why is it that you can still walk onto a gastroenterology ward and order a sausage sandwich or lamb casserole when we all know this, and when this food isn't even being served at the conference? Surely the food that's good enough for us should be good enough for our patients as well. And if I had walked into a conference 5 years ago, and I know because I would ask questions like this 5 or 6 years ago, it would generally be met with a ripple of discontent and a few sighs, and the microphone would switch off. But this year at the conference, I got a very positive response. And, there was a little round of applause and everybody agreed. And, so I think the pendulum is swinging, really. It is changing. Attitudes towards this is changing. And people are getting more and more evidence, more and more aware of all of the evidence that drove me to make the change for my patients and for me. And to be quite honest, I think the evidence around the climate impact is also becoming a real driver of that. So as you know, there's a big drive within GP practice, so within hospital practice, and everything we do within the NHS to ensure that what we're doing is also compatible with reducing our impact on climate change and helping to address the climate emergency. And I think that's been a very powerful lever within medical practice as well.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. And it's so heartening to hear that the gastroenterologists seem to be taking this seriously, because I think it's much more common, certainly amongst the people that I see and talk to about plant-based diets, it's that they say, if it's so simple, doctor, why are the vast majority of health professionals not plant-based? And I find that difficult to explain sometimes. I mean, how close do you think we are to hearing this sort of across the NHS? And is there anything we could really do more of as a group?
I think it is getting closer. I think the conversations are happening, and certainly I've had approaches from a number of very senior decision makers within the NHS who are looking at how we can make this part of our NHS practice, how we can maybe follow the lead that Mayor Eric Adams has shown in New York City. So people may already know about this listening to the podcast, but if you are in New York City now and you're hospitalized in one of New York's, I think, 13 public hospitals, the menu that you'll be given is a healthy plant-based menu. So there are animal products and meat products available for people who'd like to request them, but they've become the non-default option. So the New York's public hospitals have gone plant-based. Why have they gone plant-based? Because they know that this is a super healthy way to eat, and they are very much aware of all of the evidence showing that people who make the switch to a plant-based diet substantially improve their health and their prognosis and their future health, and are going to spend less time in hospital, and they're going to cost the healthcare system less money. They're going to consume fewer medications. They're going to be less likely to end up in the cath lab having coronary artery stents. They're going to be less likely to end up in the oncology suite having chemotherapy for bowel cancer. So it's an investment that pays back over time, very much, and it's certainly worth making that investment. So I think if big public health systems like those in New York can make that change, that it can't be that difficult. It really isn't rocket science for us to look at the food that is served within the NHS. But the NHS moves slowly. And I think that's why it's really important for all of us who are aware of the evidence to be very open and very clear and very passionate and be enthusiastic, positive, helpful advocates for this.
Yeah, I mean, to the right people, if you've got an individual in front of you, I can do something as an NHS professional, like recommend them your book, The Plant-Based Diet Revolution. So what do you hope people will take from your book?
Oh, well, gosh, that's a big question. So the book that I wrote is called The Plant-Based Diet Revolution, and it really was such a lovely opportunity that came up to write a book. I think after I'd done a podcast, I was contacted by publishers, and they said, "Hey, you make a lot of sense. We'd like you to write a book." So the main message of the book is that food matters, and our diet and lifestyle matter. And by leading a healthy diet and lifestyle, and by eating more plant-based meals, and by building your meals around fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, and all of those healthy foods, not only can you enjoy super tasty meals that leave you feeling great and energized and happy, not only can you achieve healthier bowel movements and have a more positive bathroom experience, but you can also add healthy years to your life. So we know, Claire, that a healthy diet and lifestyle extends, this is UK data, so we know that people who have a healthy diet and lifestyle, so they don't smoke, they minimize their alcohol intake, they maintain a healthy body weight, they exercise regularly, and they eat a high fiber, predominantly plant-based diet or exclusively plant-based diet, we know that individuals who tick all of those boxes add about 10 years of healthy life expectancy to their time on this earth. So 10 extra healthy years, 10 years of thriving to their life expectancy, 10 years of not drawing on NHS resources because they are so healthy. Now, who doesn't want an extra 10 years of healthy life? So that could be the difference between seeing your grandchildren finish primary school and being there when your grandchildren graduate from university or start their first business or have their first child. Who doesn't want that? And we talked earlier about whether we should soft pedal the data and say, yeah, just make some moderate changes and you'll be right. You're not going to get there with moderate changes. We need to be very clear that the changes that you need to make are pretty significant for many people in the UK. So if we talk about those healthy habits, healthy diet, avoiding excess alcohol, maintaining a healthy body weight, exercising regularly, and not smoking, those are very simple things. Those are very simple and easily understood propositions. But unfortunately, due to our standard Western diet and lifestyle, these very, very simple behaviors have become very, very difficult to achieve. So I hope that the book, well, I know that the book does this, because what the book does is it makes the diet, the food aspect of it, super simple. It explains the science, the gut microbiome science, why a plant-based diet is so good for gut health, brain health, heart health, and body health. But then also gives people the recipes and meal plans they need. So it's a very, very practical book that will guide people through the food side of things. And so many of my patients and people who've enjoyed the book have told me that once they've made that switch to a plant-based diet and they realize what difference the food that they choose to consume 3 times a day makes to their overall health, then suddenly becomes a no-brainer for them. They suddenly start looking at their alcohol consumption. If they smoke, they look at their cigarettes and stop smoking cigarettes. If they're not physically active, they start looking at that, because now their mind is open, and now they're able to consider those daily habits that can add health and happiness to their lives.
Yeah, it is a lovely book, and I use it and I'm happy to recommend it. One of the things you mentioned was about the Western diet, and of course we know that on a bigger level, we always talk about the Western diet lacking in fibre. But drilling down a bit, can you give us a bit of an understanding about fibre and what are the different types, and why it is that when you think about the weight of 30 grams and that being the target, why is it so difficult to achieve that, and why are only 1 in 10 people in the UK managing that?
Yeah, so fiber is a difficult topic, really, to get into real detail about. I suppose if we try and make it really simple, fiber is a structural carbohydrate found in plants. So we can only get our dietary fiber from fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts and seeds, leafy greens, and all of those delicious plant-based sources of food. We typically kind of thought about fiber as roughage. So maybe 40 years ago, we thought about fiber as roughage. If we didn't get enough fiber, we would get constipated. So this guideline was set like, oh, you need to consume at least 30 grams of fiber per day to avoid constipation. But of course, what we know is that the importance of consuming enough fiber in our diet goes way beyond avoiding constipation. Of course, that's that's an excellent goal to have, to avoid constipation. But back in the 1970s, from the incredibly important work of Dr. Dennis Burkitt, so people can look up Dr. Dennis Burkitt. Dr. Burkitt was an Irish-trained UK surgeon who spent time working in the UK and in rural Africa. And what he noted was that when he was living and working as a young surgeon in rural Africa, although rural Africans certainly had their health challenges, he didn't have to get out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, Claire, to deal with a diverticular perforation, or to deal with an obstructing bowel cancer, or to deal with a bout of acute appendicitis when he was in rural Africa. But these were the things that kept him out of his bed at night when he was in the UK. And that led him to some really important epidemiological work and to develop the so-called fiber hypothesis of health. And his paper, which I think was published in 1974, on diseases of Western civilization, was a real landmark for public health and dietetics and medicine, because it put forward this theory that the plant deficiency, the fiber deficiency that came in post-war Europe and post-war the United States, as people in these high-income countries began to refocus their dietary intakes on fiber-free foods like meat, dairy, and processed foods, largely driven by the food industry, that this fiber deficient approach to food was largely responsible for soaring rates of heart disease, cancer, obesity, type 2 diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease, diverticular disease, etc. And so that theory was put forward about 40 years ago, and more, 50 years ago. And Dr. Burkitt's theories have absolutely stood the test of time. And I talked about some of the gut health statistics in terms of GI diseases at the very start of this conversation. But Dr. Burkitt had talked about making sure that you were getting your soluble fiber to help to keep your gut healthy, and your insoluble fiber to help to prevent constipation. But of course, the whole concept of soluble versus insoluble fiber is more academic than pragmatic, because if you're eating a healthy plant-based diet with fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, you are going to be getting both soluble and insoluble fiber and everything in between. So not only are you getting all these lovely plant-based sources with all of the protein and vitamin A and vitamin C and vitamin E and phytonutrients and antioxidants and healthy non-heme iron and all of these wonderful things that explain why people who eat a healthy plant-based diet are so healthy. But you are also getting a huge variety of plants in your diet. You're getting a huge variety of fibers and what we refer to as microbiome available carbohydrates. So you are helping to build a really healthy gut microbiome, these trillions of microbes that reside predominantly in our large bowel, our colon. And when we eat a diet that is built with a huge variety of whole grains, fruits, and vegetables, we are building a really, really healthy gut microbiome, which is so important because we've learned in the last 15 or 20 years, to quote the Sonnenbergs, that our gut microbiome is in many ways a control center for human biology. And by building a healthy gut microbiome, we are building a gut microbiome that is not conducive to chronic inflammation, which is a main unifying driver of so many chronic diseases, that we are promoting healthy cell metabolism, healthy genetic regulation, that we are helping to promote a healthy immune system, that we are improving our gut health, our mucosal defenses, and we are building a gut microbiome that produces healthy short-chain fatty acids and vitamins and antioxidants and doesn't produce secondary bile acids and hydrogen sulfide gas and all of these other postbiotic substances that are generally have negative impacts on human health. So the fiber consumption piece is really, really important. And we could do another 2 hours on the importance of dietary fiber and the importance of plant diversity within our diet. But the reason that it's become difficult to achieve that is sadly because of the industrialization of our food system. The standard global diet, used to be called the standard American diet, standard British diet, standard Western diet, is a diet that is made up that most of our calories are coming from ultra-processed foods, meat, and dairy. The fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains, the legumes, the nuts and seeds barely feature on average dietary intakes. And those are the foods that contain dietary fiber. So when I'm speaking to my patients at clinic and I want to address their fiber deficiency or find out if they have fiber deficiency, and this is something that any practitioner can do in their clinic, is I start very simply. I will just ask the patient, because we're all limited for time, Claire, God knows, certainly in my NHS practice, I wish I had 3 times as much time to spend with my patients. I simply ask the patient, how many pieces of fruit do you eat every day? Banana, apple, orange, bowl of strawberries, bowl of blueberries. How many servings of vegetables do you eat every day? Where a serving would be about 3 tablespoons. And how many servings of whole grains do you eat every day? So again, that's about 3 big tablespoons of oats, quinoa, whole grain pasta, brown rice, etc. And if they answer, I have 3 pieces of fruit, 3 servings of vegetables, and 3 servings of whole grains every day, then that's a very back of a tofu pack calculation of their dietary intakes. And if they're hitting all 3 of those domains and their total servings are 9, then they are not fiber deficient, most likely. They are probably just about getting their 30 grams of fiber per day. But of course, we know the epidemiological data tells us in clinical practice, if you start asking patients these questions as well, you will find out that patients are very, very often, through no fault of their own, very unaware of the incredible health benefits of those foods. And very often, people would say, okay, yeah, I probably have 1 piece of fruit every day. I try to have an apple. I love vegetables. And these are genuine answers that I've had at clinic. I love vegetables. I have them every weekend with my roast dinner. And then when you ask patients about whole grains, they will say, oh, what do you mean a whole grain? I love that bread with the seeds. The seedy bread at Sainsbury's. I eat that. And that's, that sounds a little bit funny, but of course it's not funny. It's devastating because people largely have had no guidance on the importance of eating these healthy fiber containing foods. So if you can just take a few minutes with your patient to ask them those three questions, you will have identified the first target for healthy dietary change. And often that first conversation with the patient about getting them towards their fiber goals will be, okay, well, look, you said you like apples. Do you like bananas and oranges? Great. Could you eat a banana, an apple, and an orange every day? Great. You said that you have pasta 3 times a week. Could you switch that out for whole grain pasta? And could you get whole grain bread? Great. I want you to try and hit that 2 or 3 times a day. That's it. That's all we're doing today. I'll see you in 6 weeks. Okay? And those conversations and that support and demonstrating to our patients that this matters to me. I'm your doctor and this matters to me. It should matter to you as well. So let's do this together. Can start some incredibly powerful conversations, Claire. And if we could get every person in the UK to sit down and have that conversation with a supportive individual, an understanding individual who's going to help educate, motivate, and support them in making those changes, we could dramatically improve the health of the population and probably reduce the incidence of numerous chronic diseases and cancers by 70 to 80%.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that always comes up with fibre, isn't it, is about processing of food. And we're talking about this so much at the moment, where people are trying to navigate that line between the whole food diet and the fact that when you eat out, or some of the things you might use at home, they will be processed to some extent. Now, Daisy in particular had a question about what's coming up with, soya milk and things like that. Should we be going as far as making our own? What does it mean when things are added there? In fact, we also had a question in from a listener, Pam, who was concerned about the fact that she really likes eating Greek yogurt, but she wants to go on that plant-based journey. She's looked at some of the plant-based options for that type of yogurt, and they've got so many things like guar. She was asking about guar gum is added. Is that a bad choice? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so first of all, we need to be absolutely clear, because I think sometimes that there is this fallacy that is promulgated that a vegan diet equals a junk food diet. Let's be clear, the standard British diet is a junk food diet. 60% of calories are coming from junk food in the UK. So before plant-based diets became really popular in the UK in the last 6 or 7 years, we already had a junk food problem, okay? The vegans didn't invent this. This has been around for a long time. So there's that, number one. Number two, ultra-processed foods should be minimized. But of course, it's important to recognize what is an ultra-processed food versus a processed food. So lightly processing foods is a good thing. It can increase the bioavailability of nutrients. Cooking your food is a form of processing. Of course, we need to cook our beans. Nobody should eat raw beans. Cooking our leafy greens, cooking our whole grains actually increases many of the bioavailable nutrients within those foods. So a healthy plant-based diet includes cooked food, processed foods like hummuses and tofu, and fermented foods. Fermenting is a form of processing. So tempeh, sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha. These are all processed foods which are really healthy, delicious, and form a really important part of a healthy plant-based diet. What we need to be cautious of is the ultra-processed foods. So ultra-processed foods are foods that are cheap to produce, and they are shelf stable, and the food industry absolutely loves them. And they're also designed to be sweet, salty, oily, and crunchy. So generally perfectly designed for our monkey brains that still believe that we are living in a time of caloric scarcity. And if we can find something that's sweet and oily or salty, that we should eat tons of it and we shouldn't stop eating it. And more than that, the foods are engineered for consumption. So the ultra processed foods. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about the foods that you walk into the supermarket and they're generally ambient products. So they're not refrigerated. The reason they're not refrigerated is because they have an expiry date in 2029 or 2030, because they are so devoid of natural ingredients that they are just never going to decay. So we're talking about Mars bars and candy bars and highly processed cookies. We're talking about pepperami. We're talking about, big bags of crisps. We're talking about chicken McNuggets. We're talking about highly processed, ultra processed junk foods, also known as junk. No business in the human digestive system. No historical benefit in terms of caloric intakes, etc. So that's junk food. When it comes to avoiding certain additives and chemicals that might be added to relatively modestly processed foods, and like I mentioned earlier, the things that we need to look out for, I think there's a fairly short list, really. So I'm not going to talk about like added oils and added salts and everything. I'm going to take that as read. But when we're talking about junk food ingredients, the things that I really advise my patients to avoid are emulsifiers. So if you pick up a processed food or an OT bar or whatever it is, and if you see that it's got emulsifiers or lecithins listed as an ingredient, it'll usually say emulsifier, then best avoided or minimized. If it says maltodextrin, which is an artificial carbohydrate, which is made in factories, white powder added to food to improve its texture and flavor. If you can, avoid it. Maltodextrin, not good for your digestive health. And then, so that's your emulsifiers and your maltodextrins. Those two classes, and emulsifiers can include lecithins, polysorbates, carrageenan, carboxymethylcellulose, but it'll generally say emulsifier. Try, if you can, avoid those. And then and then maltodextrin. When it comes to things like plant gums, like guar gum and pectin, those may actually be beneficial for your gut health and may be beneficial for your gut microbiome. But of course, you can get them from eating fruits. So you don't need to buy a processed food. But if I, for example, picked up a plant-based milk or like a soya milk or something, and if I saw that it had guar gum added or a little bit of oil added to it, like a plant-derived oil, which is going to be a good source of polyunsaturated fatty acids, that's fine. I would say, okay, that's fine. That's okay. But if I saw maltodextrin or emulsifiers, I would put it back on the shelf. And, if you know that, it really does change the way you shop. So I'll give you an example. In my house, we got 3 kids. There's me, my wife, 3 kids. We're all vegan, and we do our best to eat healthy plant-based. Of course, we also live in the real world. Okay, that's a whole other conversation. So I popped into Sainsbury's on the way home yesterday, and one of the things I wanted to get was some bread. So, we'll often bake our own, make nice flatbreads, etc. But obviously, we live in the real world. I'm a full-time doctor. My wife works. We're busy. We need some quick bread. So I just stood in the bread aisle at Sainsbury's, and I had 2 products, which the wrapping was almost identical. So in my left hand, I've got Sainsbury's, and this could be any shop, okay? I'm sorry, we shop at Sainsbury's, okay? So this could be any shop. So in my left hand, I've got whole grain flatbreads, or these wraps, okay? Whole grain wraps, big, round, flat wraps, great for making a burrito or whatever. And in my right hand, I've got whole grain pita breads, soft pita breads. So they're both whole grain. They're in the same packaging. They look very, very similar. And you might assume that all they've done is one is rolled out really flat and the other one isn't so flat, that they're the same product. But you flip them over and you read the ingredients and you see that while the pita bread is made with whole grain flour, yeast, salt, and calcium, the other bread has a whole bunch of artificial emulsifiers and other ingredients in it, including lecithins. So then it becomes a very simple choice. I'm going to put the wraps back, And we're going to take this other convenient choice, which is whole grain and doesn't have any emulsifiers in it. So obviously shopping with me is like a bunch of laughs. Takes me a long time to get around the supermarket. But those are the ingredients that you need to look out for.
Right. I mean, that's really clear and really helpful. I might have to listen to that section again, I think, because it's easy to mix up the good and the bad in there. So you don't have a Greek yogurt recipe for Pam then? I mean,
oh my goodness,
we want to make our own.
The one thing that I noticed is that a lot of the supermarkets now have plant-based dairy alternatives. But it's worth. So I'm not really a yogurt guy, not a Greek yogurt guy. But I do often wander through the aisle. Like I said, shopping with me is a barrel of laughs. And I just look at what's in all of these products. And there are products on the shelf which are plant-based yogurts, which are they'll be in the cool section. They'll be refrigerated. But spend a little bit of time. It's worth investing your time. You will find plant-based yogurts that are basically made from soya milk, water, a little bit of salt, and live cultures. And that's where you want to go. You want to go for these products that are very, very basic and have very few ingredients and don't contain the nasties that I mentioned a few minutes ago, particularly the emulsifiers. And my experience of looking through the aisle is that lots of the products have lots of those ingredients in them. And that's not a vegan issue, that's a food industry issue. The food industry has been using these junk food chemicals since the 1950s. But there are products on the shelf that don't contain those and are very, very basic fermented foods, which use non-dairy sources of protein and fat like soya.
Right. I mean, we've talked a lot about avoiding disease today. And I think what you've done is you've given this brilliant overview that's really motivating for people starting out, what we should be eating more of and what we can avoid. I think we're going to need to get you back to talk about what happens when people have already got disease. So that would be brilliant. But you don't get to go today without telling us what you're having for dinner tonight.
Oh, for dinner tonight? Well, yesterday. So we're big slow cooker fans. So yesterday, my wife made a big. So this happens a lot in our house. So a big slow cooker filled with beans and mushrooms and red peppers and tomato sauce and a little bit of soy for that lovely umaminess. So basically like a big stew, which becomes incredibly versatile because we'll have that for spag bol, with pasta and nutritional yeast. And then the next day I'll get a big chunk of it and I'll put in some sriracha sauce and some chili. And then it becomes a chili and I can have it on a baked potato. So my plan for tonight is to use some of that as a chili. I'll probably have it on a baked potato. There's some sweet potatoes in the fridge. And I've got some sprouts in the fridge as well. So I'm going to throw those on top. Maybe a little bit of nutritional yeast, a few chili flakes. I'll see what else. So whenever I'm building a meal, and when you make the switch to a healthy plant-based diet, your fridge becomes quite exciting, because you've got some leftovers, you've got some fresh stuff, you've got some leafy greens, you've got seasonings on the shelf. And I would even maybe toss a teaspoon of flax seeds, ground flax seeds on top of that as well for the omegas. So there you go. So like you and like all plant-based doctors, at heart, I'm really a foodie. And when it comes to building meals, I'm all about the flavor, but also the plant diversity. And yeah, I'm looking forward to dinner now already, and it's only 11:15.
I know what you mean. But you have to ask me what I'm having for dinner, Alan.
Yes, what are you having for dinner tonight, Claire? What's on the menu?
Well, you might be familiar with this one. I'm having sticky tofu, courgettes, greens and kimchi.
One of my
Page 146.
Yeah, one of my absolute favorites. And that sticky tofu is epic, is absolutely epic.
Yeah. No, I've done it before. And there's always a bit of, I have to admit, I'm often substituting. So tonight I'm putting the broccoli instead of the greens, but it still works really well. And the marinade is lovely.
So yeah, that's so simple. So that's just, you get a really firm tofu, So I like the Tofu company, Tofoo. That's a really nice firm tofu, very easy to use for people who aren't familiar with using tofu, or any extra firm tofu. The nice thing about that particular brand, other brands are available, is that it's very dry and firm, so it's very easy to handle. So you're just going to marinate that in a couple of tablespoons of soy sauce with a tablespoon of maple syrup. You're going to move that around, just get that nicely coated in a bowl, and then you're going to get a nice dry pan, medium heat, and you're basically searing it on each side for just a couple of minutes. Delicious.
That's brilliant. I think listeners will be so pleased to hear that they don't have to make tofu in an air fryer, as Daisy always recommends, because not everyone has one. All right. Thank you so much for your time today. That was absolutely brilliant. And I hope that the rest of the day goes well for you.
Oh, thanks, Claire. I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, we'll definitely get you back. Thank you.